The Eurasian continent is the largest landmass on Earth. The continental climate has formed the world's largest grasslands here, which is known as the Eurasian steppe. Since the Neolithic era, this region has constantly produced and replaced nomadic tribes that rely mainly on horseback riding and pastoralism, possessing powerful military mobility, profoundly influencing the history of the Eurasian continent. Among these nomadic peoples, we are most familiar with the Mongols because they established the largest unified regime in human history by territorial area, reaching about 33 million square kilometers at its peak, accounting for around 22% of the known world's land area at that time. However, the first steppe empire to be truly established on the Eurasian steppe was actually founded by the Xiongnu people. Today we will delve into the history of the Xiongnu in one go. In the 4th century BC, the East Asian steppe was divided among several tribes: Donggu located in Liaodong and eastern Mongolia, Shanyue riding and shooting arrows, Linghu and Lufan distributed in northern Shanxi and Jixian areas, Yaji in the Hexi corridor, Gansu and Chilean mountains. Lastly, there were the Xiongnu, initially active north of Yinshan mountain. Among East Asian steppe tribes, their strength was moderate. At that time, the Warring States period in China saw intense competition. Among 7 major states, northern steppe tribes had yet to form a unified regime. According to Sima Qian's description, early Xiongnu lived by mountains and water sources, migrating with the seasons, herding livestock as their main occupation, skilled at bending bows to shoot birds and animals, indicating they were still in a loose tribal state. Before we delve into the rise of the Xiongnu, let's first get acquainted with these people. Firstly, their appearance. They are described as short and sturdy, with large round heads, broad faces, high cheekbones, wide noses, thick beards above the chin, and only a small tuft below it. Long earlobes pierced with holes wore an earring each. The head was shaved except for a single braid on top. Eyebrows were thick and dark eyes, typical of Asians. They wore long robes reaching to their calves, split at both sides, tied at the waist with a belt, sleeves tightened around wrists, short fur draped over shoulders, wearing leather hats and shoes, wide trousers fastened tightly at the waist by a leather belt. Bow and arrows hung on the left side of the waist. Regarding the origin of the Xiongnu, it remains a major mystery in historical studies. They spoke languages belonging to the Turkic-Mongolic language family, but historians generally agree that the Xiongnu were not a single ethnic group, but rather an alliance of tribes from Donggu, Dingling, Linyu, Qiang, and Yuezhi, among others. As some of these tribes gradually formed a cohesive steppe culture, they came to be collectively known as the Xiongnu around the 3rd century BC. Around this time, according to Sima Qian's records, the Xiongnu became a unified, powerful ethnic group led by a chief called Chenyu. The title Chenyu was actually an abbreviation for Chanyu, meaning the one who rules. Below him were 2 major officials, Chuchi, Wang, left and right wise kings. Chenyu resided in the mountainous area upstream of the Orkhon River, with the left wise king as his presumed successor living to the east near Korkin Gol, while the right wise king lived westward around today, Esoland and Tedi. Besides Chenyu and the 2 wise kings, the Xiongnu ruling group included left and right Luliwang, left and right grand commanders, left and right great commandants, left and right great doorkeepers, 1,000-man leaders, 100-man leaders, 10-man leaders. From this setup, it is clear that the Xiongnu regime was organized like an army, with their lifestyle resembling constant military campaigns usually heading southward. This purely militarized, combatant tribe naturally had a violent and bloodthirsty way of life. For instance, when a chieftain died, his wives and followers would be sacrificed by cutting their throats in hundreds or even thousands. They also liked to take enemy skulls as trophies, shaving off the top of the head and making containers out of leather for drinking blood wine during solemn ceremonies. In mourning, they would cut their faces with knives so that tears and blood flowed together. Due to their nomadic lifestyle without agriculture, but only pastoralism, they basically ate meat from livestock, obtaining other resources through raids due to their mobility on horseback. Thus, the Xiongnu perfectly embodied what it means to be savage. The first time the Xinyu appeared as a formidable force was at the end of the 3rd century BC, when Qin Shi Huang unified China and built the Great Wall to fend off them. Around 214 BC, General Meng Tian drove the Xiongnu out of today's Ordos region. However, this didn't stop their expansion. With the south blocked by the Great Wall, they expanded eastward and westward. In 209 BC, a fierce power struggle erupted within the Xiongnu, leading to Taiman Chan being killed by his own son Modun Chanyu. Under Modun's leadership, the Xiongnu began large-scale expansion, defeating Dongwu at Manchuria's border and severely weakening Yuezhi in western Gansu. In 202 BC, taking advantage of the chaos during the Chuao-Pin War, Modun invaded Han territory, occupying the Hexi region. Thus, a vast steppe empire spanning Mongolia, Hexi Corridor, Inner Mongolia, Outer Manchuria, and southern Siberia was born. Soon after, Liu Bang established the Han Empire in the south. Emperor Gaozu of Han wasn't content with losing the Hexi region to the Xiongnu, and personally led an expedition against them in 200 BC aiming to reclaim lost territories. However, at this point, the Han was still inferior compared to the Xiongnu. Poorly equipped, Liu Bang was besieged on Mount Bayan, leading his army into a desperate situation. Finally, Emperor Liu Bang's wife Empress Eli negotiated with the Xingnu and married a Han princess to Mujujinyu, thus securing the withdrawal of the Xingnu forces. From then on, the Han dynasty temporarily maintained superficial peace through marriage alliances with the Xiongnu. Since they had taken a Han princess as their wife, the Han could not move against them for a while, so the Xiongnu turned to harass Yuezhis instead. In 1974 BCE, Mujujinyu, son Laoshang Chanyu ascended to power. At this time, the military strength of the Xiongnu had expanded to an astonishing 400,000 cavalrymen. With such overwhelming military might, Laoshang Chanyu quickly defeated Yuezhis and even made a drinking cup out of the skull of their king. This marked the peak of the Xiongnu Empire's power, stretching from the Aral Sea in the west to Liaodong in the east, southward to the Great Wall of China, and northward to Lake Baikal. They firmly controlled the eastern segment of the Silk Road. Meanwhile, the Yuezhis were forced to leave western Gansu and migrate into the vast western regions. The westward migration of the Yuezhis was the first major ethnic relocation in Central Asia's history, causing a massive upheaval across Central Asia. The Yuezhi people, despite being defeated by the Xiongnu, still constituted a large tribal confederation. Even a dying camel is larger than a horse. Thus, when some Central Asian peoples saw the Yuezhi coming, they too were forced to migrate. For example, the Sakas, who lived in regions like Tashkent, Fergana, and Kashgar, moved into areas ruled by Greeks, crossing Sogdia to enter Bactria and occupying Drangiana and Arachosia, causing a collapse of Greek rule there. Due to this influx, nomadic tribes originally residing in these regions were also pushed westward towards the Parthian Empire ruling Iran, severely impacting it. Thus, the Xiongnu's first expansion set off a chain reaction, leading to the formation of many Central Asian states, such as the Kushan Empire later on. After driving out the Yuezhi people, the Xiongnu pressed further into Central Asia and became the greatest threat to the Han dynasty in the north. Compared to the arid western regions, the fertile plains of China were far more attractive. In 1967 BCE, the Xiongnu violated their marriage alliance with the Han and invaded Shanxi, as far as Suiyang, burning a palace there. In 1958 BCE, they raided north of the Wei River, coming dangerously close to Chang, and by 1942 BCE, they had attacked northern Shaanxi near Datong, along the Great Wall in Yan South. At this point, the Xiongnu were the most powerful empire on the Asian continent and feared no one. However, after the reigns of emperors Wen and Jing, the Han Empire had grown strong enough to challenge them. In 1941 BCE, when Emperor Wu ascended to the throne, he decided to change the previous policy of marriage alliances and actively engage in warfare against the Xiongnu. But since the Xiongnu were too powerful, Emperor Wu thought it best to ally with the Yuezhi, who had been displaced by the Xiongnu. He sent Jiang Qian on a mission to the western regions, but Jiang Qian was captured by the Xiongnu shortly after leaving Han territory and spent 10 years in captivity before escaping to Daiwan Fergana. From there, he traveled to Yuezhi but found them unwilling to help due to their new prosperous land. Disappointed, Zhang Qian returned only to be captured again for a year by the Xiongnu, before finally returning to Han territory in 1926 BCE. With no support from the Yuezhi, Emperor Wu launched a war against the Xiongnu alone, and unexpectedly created a legend. In 929 BCE, General Wei Qing led a cavalry force through Gobi Desert to raid Longcheng, killing 700 enemies before returning victoriously. The following year, Wei Qing attacked Yanmen Commandery with 3,000 cavalry, slaying thousands of Xiongnu soldiers. In 127 BCE, he again led an army of 30,000 to defeat the White Willow and Lufan kings of the Xiongnu, reclaiming the Hexi Corridor region where Han settlers were established in Shufang County. The Xiongnu were naturally unwilling to remain defeated, so the newly enthroned Huanye Chanyu launched fierce counterattacks, carrying out two large-scale invasions in 1926 and 1925 BC, killing and capturing thousands of Han subjects. Consequently, in 124 BC, Wei Qing again led 30,000 cavalry against the Xiongnu, launching a night raid on their camp and scoring another resounding victory. In 119 BC, Wei Qing and Huo Kubing set out from two different directions, Wei from the Kuku Haotun region in northern Shaanxi, and Huo from Shanggu, near modern Xuanhua, northwest of Beijing, and struck directly across the Gobi Desert to assault the Xiongnu heartland, forcing the Chanyu to flee while eating sand in a fierce southern gale. In this campaign, Wei Qing eliminated or captured nearly 20,000 enemies, while Huo Kubing penetrated some 600 miles into what is now Outer Mongolia and took over 80 Xiongnu chieftains prisoner. By this point, although the Han army had not completely annihilated the Xiongnu, it had fully achieved its military objectives. The Xiongnu were driven back north of the Gobi and lost direct control over the western regions. In fact, even after these heavy blows, the Xiongnu still retained the capacity to strike back. However, starting from 60 BC, the very year that Caesar was elected Roman consul, internal strife erupted among the Xiongnu as two ambitious rivals, Huanye and Jiji, both contended for the title of Chanyu, plunging the confederation into civil war. At the beginning, Jidi had hoped to completely defeat Huanye and reunify the Xiongnu Empire. However, unexpectedly, Huanye ran to Chang and to submit to the Han dynasty in order to preserve his position as Chanyu. With the backing of the Han dynasty, Jidi naturally could eliminate Huanye anymore. Thus, the Xiongnu Empire was split from then on. Under the support of Emperor Shundi of Han, Huanye's tribe controlled the core region of the Xiongnu and became a vassal state of the Han dynasty, historically known as the Southern Xiongnu. Jidi's tribe moved westward to near the Aral Sea, continuing to be enemies with the Han dynasty, historically known as the Northern Xiongnu. This split was a major turning point in the history of the Xiongnu, directly sounding the death knell for them. Because the Han dynasty wouldn't allow an enemy state to exist long term. If the Xiongnu hadn't split, they might have continued fighting with the Han dynasty for hundreds more rounds. But this split was like cutting off one arm, and so the already not so good days of the northern Xiongnu quickly came to an end. In 36 BC, Deputy Commander Chen Tang directly attacked the northern Xiongnu's main camp during a chess game, eliminating what remained of Jidi's forces. From 73 to 89 AD, General Du Shen of Eastern Han launched 3 large-scale northern expeditions and defeated the northern Xiongnu in Gaochang Mountain. But the northern Xiongnu never submitted to the Han dynasty. Their remnants migrated to Central Asia at the end of the 1st century and disappeared from historical records. It wasn't until nearly 400 years later, around 370 to 375 AD, when this mixed-blood offspring of the northern Xiongnu crossed the Volga River and Don River into Europe, that they reappeared in history as a feared force, with their leader being none other than Attila. This was the fate of the northern Xiongnu. The story of the southern Xiongnu is much simpler because once a nomadic tribe submits to a Chinese dynasty, its only outcome is Sinicization. During the late Eastern Han period, when wars broke out frequently in central China, the southern Xiongnu naturally became involved in political struggles there. Dongjua heavily relied on southern Xiongnu cavalry after taking control of Luoyang and bestowed high ranks and generous rewards upon them. Elibu also allied with southern Xiongnu nobles multiple times to oppose Cao Cao. After unifying the north, Cao Cao abolished the hereditary system for Chanyu, fully integrating the southern Xiongnu into the Chinese political system. By the end of the Three Kingdoms period, the southern Xiongnu had deeply Sinicized. Their nobles took on the Han surname Liu, spoke and dressed in the style of Han people, received Confucian education from a young age, etc. During the 16 Kingdoms period, southern Xiongnu noble Liu Yan even claimed to be a descendant of Emperor Gaozu Liu Bang, establishing his own kingdom called Han in 304 AD. By the 5th century, Xiongnu culture had completely disappeared from history. Looking at the history of the Xiongnu, it is clear that their impact on human history was mostly indirect but extremely profound. First, they were the first nomadic people to establish an empire, proving that nomadic societies could also form cross-regional governments and laying down the basic model for all future steppe empires, deeply influencing later Turkic, Rouran, Mongol states, etc. Second, the Xiongnu brought significant military changes, widely equipping composite recurve bows and popularizing mounted archery, achieving true horse-archer integration that forced Han armies to gradually become cavalry-based subsequent Turkic, Mongol. Western European night warfare also inherited aspects of this model. Lastly, due to their activities across the Eurasian continent, a domino effect was triggered, from Xiongnu invasions provoking large-scale migrations to several centuries later when Huns related to them invaded Europe after disappearing in Central Asia. There were traces of the Xiongnu all over this land's history. Therefore, the Xiongnu are undoubtedly one of the most influential nomadic peoples in human history, marking the first thunderclap on the Eurasian steppe.